Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast, our instant reaction from the Florida Atlantic-Ohio State game. I am Tony Gerdeman. Here, as always, Tom Moore.
I think so.
Yep. All right.
I don't see it in the game notes. I'm not sure.
So we just got back from interviews following Ohio State's 45-21 win. Now, I will admit, Tom, at the end of the first quarter, I stepped out. I did not come back until the end of the game. From what I've seen, it's time to bet your house on a national championship for the Ohio State Buckeyes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they were on pace to do the Georgia Tech 222
and did they do that?
Cumberland
I assume they
0.
did that?
Yeah. I think it was. As far as I know, I kind of blacked out after that fourth touchdown. I assumed they beat.
Yeah, so we're
points.
guessing. I already said 45-21. I guess that's strange. No, Tom, this was a season opener in many ways. It was a season opener for Florida Atlantic's defense. They must have gotten to the game late. You know, they might be thinking about the hurricane, the not being able to get back home. They weren't thinking about defense. I think that much is clear because Ohio State, Justin Fields shredded them early on. At one point, they were I was trying to decide, were they the worst defense I've ever seen here? And They moved up all the way to the fourth worst defense, behind Florida A&M, behind Bowling Green a few years ago, behind New Mexico State, I believe, in 2009, and then this one. But things got better, or Ohio State let off of the gas quite a bit, which isn't a huge shock when it is your season opener. This is a new cast of characters, this is new coaches, new players, new quarterbacks, new offensive line, and everything came really, really easy. Jeremy Ruckert, after the game, said games are harder or games are easier than practice. So when things go really easy in the first quarter, it's not a surprise if things get let up, and then you find out that it's harder to. It's like, I don't know, going uphill, starting in second gear or something. You can't. Hard to get back up to speed.
Well, someone asked Ryan Day about it, the fact that it looked like, Justin Fields is going to have a real short day, and then all of a sudden Justin Fields is playing well into the fourth quarter. And Ryan Day said, he hoped his players weren't thinking that way, that they weren't thinking 28-0 first quarter, game over, start thinking about Cincinnati. That's kind of what Florida A&M or Florida Atlantic clearly played better after those first four drives.
Yeah.
You stopped having guys. It wasn't just that Ohio State scored 4 touchdowns. It was that there were just receivers running wide open all the time.
It looked like this was the first time they had played football.
Yeah, it was. They were very clearly the worst football team I have ever seen in this stadium in that first quarter.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, the offense still wasn't doing anything for them, but the defense suddenly woke up and it became a competitive football game.
Well, and let's go ahead and talk about the offense. Well, actually, let's talk about Justin Fields at first, because that's where it should start. That's where everything starts. The fourth play of the game, he busts out with a 51-yard touchdown run. Looked very easy, but that's what he brings to this offense. We've been talking about it, that obviously this is something that Dwayne Haskins couldn't do, something that JT Barrett could do, not at that rate of speed. He brings that. And I did want to get back onto the struggling running game, but I go right back to it. You have that ability to run the ball with him, and it helped, but it still wasn't a dominating running performance by the Buckeyes. I think late in the third quarter they had about 147 yards rushing, and 51 of those were from Fields' one carry. So they're averaging about 4 yards a carry outside of that. Now they gussied up the numbers and put some makeup on it and put some lipstick on it, and we're at 237 yards to finish the game. And it's good that you can run the ball when Florida Atlantic knows you're trying to run the clock out. But that's to me the one thing I'm leaving from this game is that I expected more from the running game, easier.
Yeah, the running game at the beginning it was like everything else at the beginning of the game. J.K. Dobbins. At the beginning of the game, I was like, wow, J.K. Dobbins is running. J.K. Dobbins looks like a different running back. He's breaking tackles, running hard. And you saw that a little bit late, but there was kind of that lull in the middle of the game where just all of a sudden nothing was happening. And he went from, what did he average last year? 4.6 yards per carry. He averaged 4.3 yards per carry today. And, 21 carries, 91 yards. Like, that's a respectable day. And as a whole, the team averaged 4.9 yards a carry. And that's fine. That's slightly above average. But that kind of numbers against this kind of defense is not going to cut it because the sledding gets a little tougher next weekend.
Yeah, long carry of 17 yards for J.K., below his season average last year, which is what you don't want to see. And then Marcus Crowley and Master T get in there and make things look a little bit better. DeMario was only 2 carries for 11 yards. They used him a little bit in the passing game, but I don't know that right now he was the not the do not call list, but the game time decision list before the game as to whether or not he would play. So maybe they didn't want to overload him. But Fields, getting back to him, we saw the passing, although, like you said during the game, you could have thrown those. We could have thrown a couple of those. The one to Benjamin Victor. There's one to Jeremy Ruckert where I think maybe the tight ends crossed and they left him wide open. Just really disappointing effort from the defense because you don't know what to think about it. Yeah, sure, Justin Fields threw the ball where they needed to go, but you better.
Yeah. It was as unbelievable a first 8 minutes of the game as you've ever seen in your life. They had 4 touchdown drives, all of them under 2 minutes, and it is not realistic to have that be your expectation for the season. Like this was, I think Ohio State ended up with basically exactly the result and the score that most people would have expected, but they did it in a way that feels very disappointing to a lot of people, probably because it was, I predicted 45-17, it ended up 45-21. So it's like, that's exactly that's exactly what you would have expected, basically. Yeah. But when it was 28-0, 8 minutes in the game, everyone's expectations have recalibrated, and it's like, oh my gosh, they're going to score 80 points today. And then they didn't score 80 points, and it's like, but you were going to score 80 points, and they held them to negative yardage in the first half, and then they gave up 20-something points. Yeah. So it feels disappointing, even though on the whole the result is basically what you would have expected. Yeah,
and the good thing for the coaches is there's plenty to criticize after this and look back on and have to improve on, and nobody's going to leave this game feeling full of themselves and comfortable with what they did and how they played. But you said the defense. They did have them under negative yards for a long time. I think at one point I tweeted out maybe late in the third, early in the fourth that Florida Atlantic had 4 drives. 3 of them, the 4 drives towards the end, constituted 225 of their 199 total yards at that point. So they were negative for a long time. And Ryan Day said after the game that the second team gave up some points and they can't allow that. They have to build their depth. And but they weren't as deep on the defensive line as we talked about before the game. Tyreek Smith and Tyler Friday practiced, or they were in warm-ups. They were dressed. I think I saw Tyreek Smith out there maybe a couple of plays, but I didn't really notice. They may not have played. Yeah. So they were relying on Ja'Shawn Cornell a lot, who was excellent. 2 tackles for loss, a sack, a forced fumble. Looked comfortable. At defensive end, looked fast, I thought, too, getting in there. And Chase Young is Chase Young, 1.5 sacks. And probably would have had 2.5, except Cornell beat him to 1. Probably would have had 3, except Landers beat him to a half of 1. So that's a good problem to have, even though they didn't have everybody that they wanted. Yeah, and, just to put this in perspective, the top 4 defensive ends are Chase Young, Jonathan Cooper, Tyreek Smith, Tyler Friday. Yeah. 3 of those 4 guys either didn't play or didn't play a whole lot today. So with one of your top 4 defensive ends, having the luxury of having a former 5-star kind of recruit like Ja'Shawn Cornell, just like, we'll just slide him out from the 3-tech out to defensive end. Like, that's a luxury most programs don't have. And then you have Zach Harrison, Javonte Jean-Baptiste. I think we call him Jean-Baptiste. Yes. But he called himself Jean-Baptiste on the scoreboard. I'm American, so I'm Jean-Baptiste, man.
New Jersey is a part of America, just so you know. But he did call himself Jean-Baptiste on the scoreboard, so we will defer to him.
I guess. His mama's going to call him Jean-Baptiste. We're going to have to call him Jean-Baptiste.
I guess so. But to have the luxury of having 2 guys who like that, who are young, Jean-Baptiste didn't play a snap last year, Harrison's a true freshman this year, to have those guys be able to put them out there, that's a luxury that I think that most teams don't have. And I think overall, you saw Ohio State rotating guys in probably earlier than they might have if they didn't feel like the game was completely in hand. They were not really working on style points today. There was a lot of playing depth. You saw a lot of different linebackers in there and defensive linemen in there, and lots of different guys getting the ball. I mean, you go down the list of guys with tackles, and it was like 15 or 18 different guys had tackles today. That's a pretty good indication you're working that depth.
Yeah, and we're jumping all over the place, but that's the lack of preparation that we do. You mentioned tackles. Baron Browning and Tuff Borland listed as oars on the depth chart at middle linebacker, and they definitely shared that role today. I think did Tuff finish with maybe one or two more tackles than Baron Browning, but you saw Baron Browning quite a bit with some pressure. He had a tackle for loss, I believe, or right at the line of scrimmage.
Baron Browning had 4 tackles, 1 for loss. Tuff Borland had 3 tackles.
Yeah, so I think a good mix if you're getting 7 tackles out of your middle linebackers against a spread offense that really didn't have a lot of plays. And when those 2 guys were in there weren't, it was 3 and out, 3 and out, 3 and out. So getting some production from them, which you didn't really, not as much production maybe as you got every game last year, especially with Baron Browning. So it was good to see him do some things. Taraji Mitchell didn't do much as a backup, but I think it's still good that he's moved away from those 2. But Browning and Borland were as good as you could hope for in game 1 based on what happened last year.
Yeah, and there were you didn't see, like they ended up giving up 21 points, but you didn't see the busts that you saw last year.
Long rush was 9 yards?
Yeah, the long run was 9 yards. At one point, before I went downstairs towards the beginning of the fourth quarter, I had looked, and they had Florida Atlantic had 1 play longer than 15 yards. And you go back to last year against Oregon State, and they gave up 31 points instead of 21 points, which was like, okay, but the way they gave up those 31 points, there were some 80-yard touchdowns and 70-yard touchdowns, and you didn't see that today, which, it's a different team. It's not so, and Oregon State may have better offensive personnel than Florida Atlantic does, but you're
how would you know?
Yeah, it wasn't just Oregon State wasn't the only team that did that to Ohio State last year either. So the fact that you didn't see that is probably kind of significant. That the simplifying things, playing fast, that seems to maybe be doing what they wanted to do.
Yeah, 12 tackles for loss. Showed the aggression. They gave up kind of one long pass, but that might have been the one to Jocelyn Wint after Brendan White had to come out because he ran and defended a long pass, and then they attacked Wint as soon as he came in. So they've obviously watched some film, but Tom,
let me just read through Florida Atlantic's depth drive chart. 3 plays minus 1 yard, 3 plays minus 11 yards, 3 plays 0 yards, 3 plays 7 yards, 6 plays 2 yards, 3 plays minus 13 yards, 3 plays minus 19 yards, 3 plays 1 yard. That gets you to a minute 39 left in the first half, and then they got a turnover right at the end of the half and had 6 plays for 15 yards, but because the drive started on the Ohio State 25, they got a field goal out of it.
Right, so it's no surprise that they would let up after being completely dominating in that first half defensively, and the offense is watching that as well. Go on.
Yeah, and they ended up, they had, second half, they had 10 plays, 65 yards, 3 plays, 9 yards, and then once you get into the end of the third quarter, start of the fourth quarter, 15 for 75, 8 for 76. So, I mean, they gave up a couple long drives sort of towards the end, but, I mean, to, at halftime, have held them to negative yardage, like that is unheard of against an FBS team.
Yeah, and that's really what I'm focused on in terms of judging this defense, because I saw plenty to like. Zach Harrison was a couple of steps away a couple of times, or had the quarterback maybe almost in the grasp, couldn't bring him down. So there's a lot of positives. The secondary, which Ryan Day was excited to see, Jeff Okuda looked really good. Had a forced fumble, had at least one pass breakup where he dove on a quick out, I believe. Josh Proctor, as we expected, had an interception down at the end of the game. Sean Wade was fine. Damon Arnett was fine. Jordan Fuller was. You don't always see him, which is good,
right?
Because we saw the deep safety quite a bit last year, and it wasn't always good, and it was rarely good. But then the bullet, Tom. We come into this game thinking that the bullet and the Sam would be, and we've said it since the spring, the winter, that they're not really going to be on the field together. You know, they when one guy's in, that means the other guy's not going to be in, and they're going to share this role. And then we get to watch the game, and they're out there, and basically the Bullet and Sean Wade are the guys who switch, seemingly.
Yeah, that was kind of odd that
we were wrong.
It wasn't that we were like speculating that. Yeah. That's what we were told. Like Brendan White talked about the fact that the Sam and the Bullet were kind of certain situations swapping on and off, and that may be the case at points moving forward this season. That may be just a matchup thing with Florida Atlantic, that they're kind of spreading you out, and therefore you are, whatever the particular matchup issue is, that makes this a situation where you're swapping Sean Wade, the kind of slot corner, for the strong safety / Bullet. They listed as a strong safety. Everything in the last 9 months has been a lie.
It's all a lie.
That's the only logical takeaway. But
Arby's.
Yeah, but that Bullet position did what it was supposed to do today, because we talked in the pregame about Florida Atlantic having a pretty good tight end, and he had a couple of catches. Harrison Bryant, 6 for 79. He had a couple, but like the bulk of that was 2 plays in that drive right before halftime when Jocelyn Went was in there, and it wasn't Brendan White. And other than that,
I think he also had a couple catches late. So he wasn't really the fact. He was 6 for 79. It's legitimate, but it wasn't like he was killing them all game long, and they were able to handle him at times. Let's see. Let's get back to Justin Fields throwing the ball. He was 7 for 9, his first 9 attempts. 2 incompletions were 2 deep balls off of the hands of
KJ Hill and Chris
Olave, where they both could have caught them. Then he would have been 9 for 9 with, 250 yards passing in the first quarter. And then at that point, you just put the robe on him, put the crown on him, and let him walk off into the sunset.
His QB rating was over 400 at one point. I don't know if I've ever seen that. So, this was 8 months of waiting for him. And it was just immediately like, oh, okay, yep, okay. Because you've had the hype since he was in high school that he and Trevor Lawrence were like 1 and 1A in all those camp circuits and in the recruiting rankings. And then last year, Trevor Lawrence is leading his team to a national championship, and Justin Fields is playing, in spot duty against UMass and Austin Peay. And, basically he was maybe a little more involved than Tate Martell was in the Ohio State offense, but it was the same kind of thing where it was like they have a starting quarterback, and they also have this guy who's good, and they want to play him just enough to run him around. And then he steps on the field today and does that in the first 8 minutes, and it was like, oh, that's okay. So yes, so apparently all the hype has been based in some reality.
You know what? Not enough hype.
Yeah, and then he struggled a little bit later, and Ryan Day has said basically you have to fail in order to learn, more or less, and. You had a little bit of failure, and Ryan Day talked about some of the things he has to work on, and setting up protections better. And there was one play that Ryan Day actually mentioned that you and I had been talking about up in the press box, where he rolls to his right on 1st and 10 or 2nd and 10, and very easily could have thrown the ball away, and decided instead to try and make a guy miss, and ended up getting tackled for a 4-yard loss. And just that's an experience thing, and you've got to at some point figure out you are not going to make every single person miss, and that's okay. You don't have to be a Superman. You just have to take care of the ball.
There are a couple of things that really impressed me with him. The throw to Olave that Olave dropped, hit him in the hands. He got drilled. Fields got drilled on that. That was the first time he said he'd been hit since last year. But then there was another one where he was getting blitzed from the blind side, and he felt it, and he spun out of it and picked up, I think maybe a couple of yards scrambling towards the sideline. But that's a play where you see the guy get blindsided, the ball goes flying. You're like, well, he just doesn't have the awareness yet that you need. But he felt that, spun out of it. He did that a couple times, so that was impressive. For a sophomore to be able to feel that and get out of it, and then you can make something with it. But rolling to the right, they did a lot of that, and some of it was successful. Other times he probably could just toss it out of bounds, but. Also, they're trying to go for 70% completion percentage, and I know every single one of those throws, he's thinking, well, crap, now I have to be even more perfect on the next throw. But again, offensively and defensively, they had to be, I expect this was very vanilla from what we're going to see down the road, and especially in 1 week against Cincinnati. So they didn't hit the 500-yard mark, but they were balanced. although some of that balance came later in the game when they were pumping their rushing stats. But this is going to be, I think, a little different offense, a little different defense next week. But even if the running game has to be better, and I don't care if it's different or they save some plays, they've got to get that push. J.K. had some really nice runs in terms of fighting for extra yards. One time he threw somebody down, and that was good to see. But when you still only end up averaging 4.3 yards per carry, that's an issue. But, yeah, that'll be a different offense, different defense a little bit next week. But still, they've got to drive Cincinnati back. They've got to bring the emotion, bring the strength that they have, and then leverage it all together to get a running game going because they're going to need it. Yeah,
they're definitely going to need a better running game, at least that consistent of a passing game. I mean, and the passing game's not going to be as easy next weekend because it's not too hard to throw 70% completions when you've got guys running wide open on your first 7 pass attempts.
Yeah.
That's a pretty good head start on getting you to that 70%. Brendan Bowen actually after the game talked about the fact that he thought that they did a better job blocking in the run game than in the pass game. He thought pass pro was a little bit more of an issue.
So he's blaming J.K.?
I think clearly. It's part of that was, I think, how FAU defended them. They rushed 3 a lot and would drop 8, and it's like, well, if there's 5 blockers and 3 defensive linemen on the field, you can kind of drive them back a little bit, and the holes look pretty big. Dobbins did at times do what Ryan Day has talked about wanting him to do. Not always trying to hit the home run. Get that 6-yard run, get that 7-yard run, just hit the hole, get what you can get. Next play, go back out there.
Well, and he would get hit early when he would get dropped at the line of scrimmage or something. It wasn't anything that I don't think he could have really done because he's getting hit right on his knees as he's moving, and you're going to go down from that. But he did run hard with power, broke some tackles, and was turning. It's very literally turning like 3-yard runs into 5-yard runs, 4-yard runs into 6. It's incremental, but it was noticeable, and you could see that the talks he's had with Ryan Day have affected the way he plays. Now you're waiting for one of those home runs to where we're looking at, if he gets a 50-yarder, we're looking at 140 yards instead of 91 yards, and you're like, well, that's a lot better, and really the difference is just that one carry.
Yeah. Ryan asks, was it just me, or did the playmakers look slow today in the open field? KJ, McCall, JK just looked flat.
What
do you think?
KJ is probably going to be like a 4.65 guy at the combine anyway, so he's not the fastest guy, and Benjamin Victor is not necessarily the fastest guy, and Jeremy Ruckert is a tight end who says he runs in the 4.7s. So I know there has been some concern from some people about the speed of the skill positions at Ohio State this year, the big targets, like Austin Mack and things like that. And really they tried once with Garrett Wilson on a quick screen that ended up being a turnover because it was a backwards lateral. And then, really didn't get Jalen Gill involved much at all. So I think they were just, like I said, keeping it very vanilla and maybe waiting to spring some more stuff next week. But I wasn't necessarily blown away by anything with the skill positions in terms of speed. There was no whoa moment. Even Justin Fields, it could have been a 4.83 instead of a 4.43, and I think he scored on that play.
Yeah, but he was moving, he was running away from guys, so that was something. But if you think about it, they didn't run a lot of the stuff that they often will run with their fast guys.
Yeah.
They didn't run a lot of those kind of quick sweeps. Yeah. Just those little touch passes. You didn't see any of that stuff today that I can remember.
Right.
So, yeah, that certainly is a pretty good indication. Yeah, they're probably saving a bunch of stuff.
Or maybe they're not going to do it anymore.
Yeah, I think
they're not going to do the effective stuff anymore.
I was going to say, I think the plays that got them about 900 yards against Michigan last year, they'll probably break those out at some point this season. Didn't need them today. Yeah. And
you can't really do that against an 8-man dropping back, sitting in zones anyway.
Yeah, that's true. So now there is a question about how often you're going to see that this year with teams defending Fields that way. Are they going to drop guys, try and keep it safe, make him beat them with his arm, and
I think so.
As soon as I saw that today, I thought, I wonder if we're going to see that a bunch more this year, because that seems that's like a logical way to attack this Ohio State offense.
Yeah, just keep everything in front of you and try to limit the plays and make them go down the field, and it's a lot of like Jim Tressel's defenses. Bend but don't break and tackle and try to get lucky. But Florida Atlantic failed in that first quarter. But Tom, after that first quarter, I think they outscored Ohio State 21-17. So Mike Price would call that a half a win.
That
to go way back to a 2002 reference.
I'm not sure you want to base anything about your life on Mike Price, but
you're right there. Anything else from the Ohio State offense that we haven't touched on yet? Chris Olave, 4 for 59, the easy 29-yard touchdown. He's fast. Don't worry about it. They didn't really no 9 routes, no deep stuff really, other than a couple of easy posts. I think we'll see more. And if Cincinnati starting safety James Wiggins, I believe, who didn't play last week, has been out. Although his backup ended up with 2 interceptions and maybe almost had a third. So I think you'll see a more dangerous passing attack next week, unless they just zone Ohio State up, and that was always JT Barrett's thing, where he would I would like to throw deep, but they're playing zone and they're just dropping back, and I can't throw against that, because that's against the rules, and just continue to find KJ Hill, find Chris Olave for 12 yards and turn it up and move the chains. And
right, you have to be patient.
Yeah.
If you're facing that, that's fine. This is not like a defense that's not beatable. You just have to be a little bit patient, a little bit more deliberate. Don't get anxious. And I think that probably Ohio State fans are more prone to get anxious in that kind of thing than Ohio State's coaches or play callers in those kind of situations. But Jamie says, love the tight end Ryan Day action. There was the throw to Ruckert. It was 2 tight ends out there. It was Luke Farrell and Jeremy Ruckert, and Farrell was the first read on that one, and they just kind of crossed, and the safety went with Farrell, and Ruckert went inside, and that was the one that literally you or I could have thrown that ball, because it was about 15 or 18 yards, and Ruckert was just standing wide open under the goalpost.
And then the second touchdown to Ruckert was Farrell was also on the field and was also the first read there, and that was covered. So Jeremy Ruckert, I think, owes Luke Farrell dinner tonight, something of that nature. But yeah, 2. How many catches was it? Just those 2, or Ruckert 4 for 38, which we knew he was a receiving threat, obviously, because that's what he came to Ohio State to be. And that's what he was in high school. But it was good to see a guy down the middle, deep down the middle. I think we saw it early on with Marcus Baugh in practice. Saw it with Nick Van Nett some in games, Jeff Hireman a little bit. But maybe we'll see it more with Ruckert, who can obviously do that sort of stuff. And I was surprised at how much 2 tight ends we saw, how much under center stuff we saw. Because you talk about these lying liars. Yeah. Ryan Day said, last week asked about the under center stuff. Yeah, we tried it, we looked at it, but it's just pretty much not for us. And we're a shotgun team. And then 15 plays out of the under center, it felt like, and I'm so tired of being lied to.
And they did it right off the bat. It wasn't like they did it just later. Now, the amount that they did it under center, I do kind of wonder, are they just kind of putting that on film to give Cincinnati something else to have to worry about this week?
Right. Apology.
They did it early enough that it wasn't exclusively that, but give Cincinnati something else to have to worry about.
But it was good to see some play action bootleg out of that.
We've seen them work on that at practice a decent amount. So they worked on it often enough that it was like, all right, this isn't nothing. But, they certainly gave the indication that it was not going to be a real central part of the offense. And they were still vast majority of their snaps in shotgun. Something else for the other opponents to worry
And everybody
about.
wants to see, hopes that turns into quarterback sneaks. So it'll be funny when the next time they're at like 3rd and 1 or 4th and 1, they go to the shotgun. Like the previous play, they were under center, and you know what? No, we're going back to shotgun. We're going to go JT Barrett right with Justin Fields, and who knows? It might turn into a 60-yarder.
It could. I think the most exciting thing today was this is it. This is it, Charlie Brown. This is the year the Great Pumpkin comes. This is the year Ohio State throws to the tight end. 2 touchdowns in the first game. They're on pace for 28 touchdowns receiving by their tight ends, which, I don't know, seems like a lot.
Do you know offhand the last time a tight end had 2 touchdown catches in a game at Ohio State?
I don't. I can say with great confidence that I do not know that off the top of my head.
I'll let the listeners research
it. Did he have 2 against Penn State in 2017? He had 1 late in that game.
I don't know, Tom. We don't need to talk about it too much. It was just it was almost rhetorical given the subject.
Okay.
Special teams. I was impressed with DeMario punt returning back there. It looks like there could be some future there, provided he stays healthy. And of course, he limped off the field once, and
yeah.
But he came in a little dinged up.
Yeah.
So.
And the hang time on the punts today was less than exemplary from Florida Atlantic. There were a lot of line drives that were. You don't really want to give DeMario McCall a 5-yard head start in the open field before your gunners need to get down there. Just that's when bad things happen.
Yeah, those scarecrows were playing with fire.
Yeah, but they hung onto the ball, which is, that's the number one thing that they say they want. Ball security. Ball security is number one. Then go ahead and make a play, but make sure you've got ball security. The last time when they were in the stadium, DeMario had a little whoops-a-daisers on special teams.
Did he?
He did, as you may or may not recall. Today, no issues at all, so that was certainly good for them to see.
DeMario with a 35-yard punt return and 2 26-yard kick returns. Mm-hmm. So it's good to see teams returning kickoffs again for a change. Any defensively, Tom, anything there that we need to touch on that we didn't? I know we mentioned Josh Proctor, who I swear that was the first time I saw him on defense that series, and then he comes up with an interception.
I felt like Jordan Fuller was out there a lot, and this is where you've got the disconnect between the Jordan Fuller or the Josh Proctor camp hype and what you're going to see on the field, because Josh Proctor can be an absolutely amazing player. Jordan Fuller might be, outside of Chase Young, the most reliable, dependable player on that defense in a spot where reliability and dependability are the most important thing. So they are going to be, if he's healthy and not completely gassed, they are going to be very reluctant to take him off the field.
Yeah, but I know you might see some people clamoring for Josh Proctor, but exactly what you said is why Jordan Fuller is out there. And Josh Proctor might intercept the ball a lot, but if he's a shaky last line of defense against the run, or he's not, if he's not the safest back line of defense, then you're not going to put him back there just because he can pick up an interception here or there, and that's great. And it'll be better even next year when he's stepping in for Jordan Fuller and he's getting some good experience now. But with your offense, with the front seven playing as well as it did, just be safe back there, and then everything should be okay. And they did that really, really well.
Mm-hmm. And we don't know necessarily that Josh Proctor wouldn't be solid in run support, wouldn't be a good back. We simply haven't gotten to see him enough to know one way or the other, but that would be an example of one thing that could keep him off the field. But if you were out there making plays, that's a pretty good way to end up on the field more. If you are a ball hawking safety, that is the type of player that is typically kind of difficult to keep off the field, and he's doing it in practice, and now he did it in a game.
Yeah, and I was on the wrong end of the field, so I didn't see how far he came. But I'm assuming it was a decent way.
Yeah, I didn't. I was right next to you, and the entire Ohio State team was between us and Josh Proctor. But Josh Proctor was not the guy who was in coverage. This was not an interception where they throw it right to the guy in the corner, just has to turn around, or the safety
was a deep guy, and he came running for it.
He made a play on the ball and made like a diving play on the ball.
But I couldn't even see the interception on the replay because the scoreboard didn't have it, completely with the angle. It's very frustrating because. I stayed back on this end in case there was an interception return coming back here. There was no return on the interception. So if I have any criticism for Josh Proctor, you got to stay up on your feet, young man. You got to return that interception. You got to turn into an offensive player as soon as you catch it. And if you're diving, find a way to land on your feet as you're diving.
That if he could do that and be a good ball hawking safety, they might even if he can dive and land on his feet.
He should play in front of Jordan Fuller.
He should. Yeah, I think that's going to be a tough ask, but if he can do it. If you want to know what it takes to get on the field, there you go. Now you know.
We don't talk about Malik Harrison enough. And he, 5 tackles today, a sack, 2 tackles for loss, did some flexing, like not like street lingo, like he actually did some flexing out there. A guy who is a quiet, and it's like Jordan Fuller, where these guys are completely safe. The coaches feel completely comfortable, and so we kind of just ignore them. Don't talk about them because there's other things to talk about. There's people are failing. They're not running hard enough. They're not fast enough. They're not catching the ball. And Malik Harrison, in his limited numbers of snaps, goes out there, and I feel like we should acknowledge the linebackers. They're playing. Pete Werner had 2 tackles in the open field that he probably wouldn't have last year. He made 2 tackles in the open field, and he was around. He was chasing guys, and I think Buckeye fans have to leave this game feeling a lot better about the linebackers, clearly than they did last year, and maybe certainly better than they felt going into the game, because there are still plenty of questions. And yes, this is still Florida Atlantic, but remember Oregon State, remember TCU, remember those games where they did not look that great. And I think what you saw today is what you wanted to see, and it was a good sign.
Yeah, I mean, you saw it was about what you didn't see.
Yes.
You didn't see the big plays. You didn't see missed tackles. You didn't see guys way out of position. You didn't see horrendous blown coverages. All that's gotten tightened up. And the linebackers, I mean, if we've said it once, we have literally said it 30 times this year. You can't judge the linebackers based on last year because you're not sure if it was the linebackers or the coaching. Well, all the players are the same, and the results look very different, at least so far this year. So draw your own conclusions there,
or just draw ours.
Or draw ours. That's fine too. That's what we're here for, to draw your conclusions for you. But the linebackers that everyone was up in arms about last year, Tuff Borland and Pete Werner, perfectly respectable games today, nice solid games today. You saw Baron Browning, if he can continue to grow, continue to establish himself as a regular at that Mike spot, that's going to be a big deal for this team. And then Malik Harrison, the ultimate tribute to Malik Harrison is last year when Ohio State's linebacker unit was just absolutely getting lit on fire on social media every weekend. You never heard people complain about Malik Harrison. Even when things were terrible, Malik Harrison was pretty good.
Yeah.
And just, again, continue to just be that solid Jordan Fuller type, just make the plays, don't be never seemingly the guy who's making the big mistake. That's incredibly valuable to have those guys on.
Are we getting locked in here?
Maybe.
That would be not good. But anyway, going back to Malik Harrison, and I remember last year against Nebraska, he had 13 tackles and did not grade out a champion. So even when he's not perfect, he's still producing. And that was good. That's good to see moving forward. That you got some linebackers. And Tom, I legitimately am concerned. We have been locked in. We can pound on some doors.
It is always an adventure on this podcast for some reason.
But it's probably good to wrap up because I think we've got everything covered. Is there anything else that Tommy Togiai with the tackle for loss? Good to see.
Yeah. I mean, just you go down that list on defense, and there's just so many names, and that's what you want in these early games. You got some of these younger guys out on the field. We saw guys like Antoine Jackson and Jerron Cage, and I mean those guys are out there in the first quarter. That's what you want to see. You want to see these guys out there, see what they can do on a Saturday, see how they're establish that depth, rest some of those starters, give guys. All of those reasons. Yeah. That's good to see, and I'm sure they're hoping that next weekend they can get out front a little bit and be able to play that depth a little more. But it's next weekend. Next weekend gets a little tougher.
Yeah, it'll be a fun one, and we will have all kinds of podcasts this week and all kinds of content leading up to that game. The next couple of days we'll be covering this one still, so make sure to check out theozone.net. Read everything there. We'll have videos as well from today, from the action, from the post games. They're already posted, and see what the players had to say, and then we'll write some stories from it, and we'll write our thoughts, and it's just going to be fantastic. And if you don't hear from us again, it's because we are still in this room.
Send help.
So thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. And we will talk to you guys in a couple of days.
Yeah.